Welcome to this new edition of the Dialogues of the International Academy of Information Studies. Today we feature a very multidisciplinary, amazing theory known as the constructal law or the constructal theory. It was a theory worked some decades ago by Professor Adrian Bejan from Duke University, a really relevant and very prestigious engineer. And the discussion will be accompanied by Professor Terry Bristol from Portland State University, who is philosopher in science and analyst of science, technology, and society. So I think we are going to have a very fine session. And Adrian, the floor is yours for approximately, the virtual floor, I mean, for approximately 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Pedro, and especially I appreciate the invitation to talk about the constructal law and especially about evolution in nature, which means everywhere. The beginning is right on the screen. It is the facts. Flow architecture is everywhere. And these two examples, the river delta and the human lung, demonstrate that one architecture unites the animate with the inanimate. And those two things together, contrary to current doctrine, represent all nature. In other words, even on the campus, we should not be separated into cubicles, so people who worry about biology, and then the rest of us who are supposedly worried about something else. You'll see in my presentation that this oneness is worth recognizing and putting to use. The first slide is a panoply of, let's call them achievements that I counted more than 10 years ago while writing the book Design in Nature with a constructal law, which I will define very soon. My colleagues and I were able to predict the river basins, the cracking, mud cracks and cracks in paint, the nature, meaning the onset and large-scale structure of turbulence, and the human lung, not only the drawing, but also the rhythm of respiration, inhaling, exhaling, the cross-sections of ducts of all kinds, such as river basins and, river channels and blood vessels. The snowflake, a design that most of us would have thought was solid and not flowing. That's wrong. It is a flow architecture that evolves, predicting the difference between a splat and a splash of a drop of ink. And then, as you'll see very soon, all animal locomotion, swimming, running, flying, speeds and rhythms of body ondulation. That was 15 years ago. Today, the broad view is the following. Nothing moves unless it is pushed. And I have some examples of things that move. The pushing comes from power, or work per unit time. The power comes from engines. These are flow architectures. Most of them are natural, not made by people. And the engines are consuming a stream of useful energy, which in my domain is called exergy, or available work. All of that, of course, is known as food and fuel, or sunlight shining on this moving architecture. In the rectangle with the dashed line fits everything that moves and dies on Earth. Dies, of course, because the movement is steadied, or the power that produces the movement is dissipated instantly during the let's call it opposition of the environment. The environment doesn't get out of the way by itself. It has to be forced, and that forcing is dissipative and gives birth to the steady state with which we have become accustomed. On the right-hand side, there are all these examples of movers that function as engines connected to dissipators and moving seemingly in a steady state or stasis. Even these neologisms you hear, live matter, robotics, energy materials, sustainability, life, climate, all these things fit inside this dash line box. The constructal law, and it's not a theory, this is a law of everything, just like the second law. The constructal law of evolution was stated this way in 1996 for a finite size. And by the way, I emphasize the key words here. Finite size means that I'm up against the doctrine of reductionism. You see, I'm marching the other way. For a finite size flow system to persist in time, and that's the definition of the live state as opposed to the dead state in physics, it must evolve with freedom such that it provides greater access to what flows. The drawing here in green is about a river basin in a laboratory. The movie tape runs from left to right. The drawing is constantly morphing. This is on the floor, rain is falling from above. The point is that the movie tape has one direction, and that is the time arrow, or the direction toward a future that is forever elusive. There's no end to evolution. And now, the constructal law is one statement. The domain in which one invokes the constructal law is a constructal theory. It's the same as in theonomics. There are only two laws used all over the place, but the applications or the invocations of those laws are innumerable, and those are the thermodynamic theories of engines, of refrigeration machines, of animal metabolism, and so on and on. Here is a first application, or a first invocation of the constructal law. A pedestrian movement on a rectangular area, such as the territory of the Atlanta airport in the upper right-hand corner. Time of movement, which is a measure of performance or goodness, that depends on the shape of the area. The area size is fixed. The shape of the area varies on the abscissa of this Cartesian presentation. On the ordinate is the time of movement averaged over all the inhabitants. And pay attention to the curve, which is a convex curve, smooth, with a minimum that's easy to figure out if you know calculus. That belly button is called perfection. The movers, forget about the movers, the designers of this airport were not aware of the curve that I'm showing you. They were aware instinctively about the fact that some area shapes are more beneficial for all the pedestrians than other shapes. And you see those sketched in this slice called imperfection, which indicates the freedom of not only movement on the area, but the freedom of making the drawing. And then on the abscissa, you see that there's a bandwidth of designs, a diversity of designs that promise a performance comparable with that of the theoretical best, the one that's called perfection. So this convex curve will appear more than once. That was about movement on an area. Movement in a line is obviously the movement of one pedestrian or one bird in flight. Let's focus on a bird in flight. The animal must work in two directions. It must lift itself. That's the work called WY. And then while falling forward, the bird must overcome the resistance of the surrounding air in order to penetrate it. So these, by the way, in the right, in the lower right, you see the prediction that comes from balancing the two work efforts. But the comparison theory is not a new story. What is new is the following: the total effort, called W, which is the sum of the two efforts, Wy and Wx, is the same convex curve with the same best speed of movement. By the way, speed of movement is synonymous with frequency of flapping the wings, and you see here that if the animal responds to the behavior of the environment, that means predators or wind speed or some other sudden events, the speed is not necessarily the theoretical one, and that means that a diversity of speeds with work requirements slightly higher than the smallest, a diversity of speeds is equally recommendable. Let's try this thing again. By the way, this is a summary of the two examples I gave you, the two curves. The first example is about freedom and diversity on an area. The second about movement in a straight line. Slightly different curves, but the same story. By the way, because I do talk to philosophers, this convex curve is really the curve at the intersection of two asymptotes, the extreme left and the extreme right. And one side of the curve speaks of, here I'm using the words from Aristotle, of too much, and the other side of the curve speaks of not enough. And so the animal, just like the human being, thrives in life by avoiding the too much and not enough, you see. And we'll see it again here in my most recent story or discovery of the animal design of a person walking his little dog on a leash. That's the sketch on the left side. Considered individually, the person has this convex curve that is about a bigger work requirement called W1, and an optimal speed that's higher than the optimal speed of the dog, because the dog is much smaller, and the dog requires a work output that's considerably lower. The message from this graph is that the two convex curves are different, and when they're different because man and dog are walking freely. But if the two are coerced to move at the same speed is indicated by this x1 on the abscissa. If they are coerced to move at the same speed, then at least one of them will be moving at a speed that is not most economical. So that means that the couple with a leash is destined to be moving less economically than the two participants moving freely. So individuals in society are different. I'm talking about people now, not the difference between man and dog. The people are different. Some are big, some are small. Some are fast, some are slow. And you can use your own adjectives in this description of diversity. And according to what I just showed you, the society as a whole benefits when the individuals are allowed to move naturally, freely, not coerced to marching cadence. That's the message from this. And The history of a civilization proves everything that I showed you to be in play, especially with regard to the evolution of human society. In the left side of the screen, you see the annual wealth of all the countries plotted versus the annual use of fuel, in the same countries. Surprisingly, but not surprisingly to me, everybody in the world is obviously not only moving on the diagonal, meaning moving upward on the diagonal, but what the diagonal represents is a translation formula telling us that what the economists called wealth, engineers and physicists would call energy use or fuel consumption. And at the top of the diagonal, you see the usual suspects. At the bottom, you don't see names because the bottom is crowded with groups that are doing their best to catch up with the leaders of the peloton. On the right-hand side, the same data plotted differently. On the ordinate is the annual use of a fuel per capita this time, and on the abscissa is the rank according to economic freedom. The so-called usual suspects are at the top, and you can read their names, and then the rest are clearly racing upward to catch up with the leaders. However, the description of the second graph is that perhaps unwittingly, racing toward greater wealth is racing toward greater freedom, and that is a message to be conveyed to politicians and government types all over the globe. What I showed you comes from my career, which is totally in thermodynamics. This is how I published throughout my career. Along the way, I combined thermodynamics with the let's say my being attracted to making drawings. Heat transfer is mainly invisible by conduction and by radiation, but it is visible in convection. Convection is the transport of heat or mass by fluid flow. You can visualize that by basically throwing debris on the surface of the river. You can see the eddies, you can see the direction of movement. You've seen smoke rising from a cigarette. That's convection. And that, of course, is what brought me into this discussion today, which I call Design in Nature. It is a bundle of constructal theories, constructal theory of animal locomotion, of river basin design, of respiration, and many other things that I showed you. Most recently, the urge to have freedom, and also the physics origin of the phenomenon of diversity. Thank you. I stop presenting.
There you go. You've done it.
I've done it. Oh, really? I can leave now? Now I can leave? No. Oh, no.
Now you have to be interrogated.
You are prisoner of the talk. Now it's the turn of Terry. We would like to see what the philosopher and analyst.
So you don't want to have questions for Bejan in between? Just let me go right ahead?
Yeah, you will have later. You will
so,
have your presentation, and then you will have a bilateral dialogue.
All right. So let's see if I can get my thing to work. So, okay. So what I'm going to do here is, this is a part of a presentation that I did at one of the constructal conferences. This is when I did in Turin, and what hath Bejan right? And the thing is that I'm coming to this from physics, and mathematics, and I'm kind of getting into Bejan. I'm going to go through a couple of things here. So first of all, I want to just, so Bejan has this insight, and I say, what happened when the dam broke? He had this insight. So I'm noticing when I'm looking at Bejan, these are things that I think that impressed me. Okay, so he sees that evolution defines the arrow of time, and then that all change is evolution of design. Yes, okay, and then design by its very nature continually morphs to better design. Okay, and this involves freedom and evolves towards greater freedom. Okay, and then there's something particularly in physics is the principle of least action, which I think has always just been a matter of confusion and so forth coming from Euler and Lagrange, and he changes it into a principle of optimization, which I think is exactly the right move. So also he sees that design is an action, and actions require free choices, and engineering practice is an action, always seeking optimization. Optimization is a trade-off between opposite ideal extremes. It's always between two extreme possibilities. And reality is not scientifically uniform. Reality is not made up of infinitesimals, so to speak. Okay, so and design action is time dependence. Evolution is about organization, not order, not entropy. And important part is we are participants, and I will come back to this in nature. We are engineers, and we are engines, if you like. So Adrian talked about engines being things. Well, we're engines, and so we're participants in it. I think it's something that Adrian comes to more explicitly later. It's implicit in everything he's doing, but only you have to reflect on it and say, oh, and by the way, we are inside this system. Okay, so, and I think that the design evolution also requires a narrative. So it's not deductive. It's not, because of freedom, evolution is not something that happened that you could derive from some first principle and say, okay, well, this is next and this is next. And I will come back to that because I think Adrian kind of missed that early on. Okay, so again, my background, I came out of physics and mathematics, and I morphed into philosophy of science, and then gradually my philosophy of science morphed into philosophy of engineering. These are my mentors and so forth, particularly Feyerabend and Lakatos. Feyerabend was my honors thesis advisor at Berkeley, and Lakatos was my PhD advisor in London until he died, which was not convenient. Anyway, so one thing that drew me to thermodynamics was that I was not happy with the philosophy of science. When I say I was not happy with the philosophy of science, it was not what the dominant image of what science didn't work. And these four guys were all rebels, and they were saying that, hey, this is not working. And I didn't like the engineering world or the scientific worldview itself. I didn't see myself inside that worldview. It's all deterministic. Where am I? Where's the inquirer? It didn't make sense to me. And so gradually, I looked around and I thought, well, thermodynamics is something where things are not time reversible. There's irreversibility. So anyway, that drew me to thermodynamics. And this is one of my mentors, Peter Atkins at Oxford. And one of his early publications, The Second Law, he comments that Carnot and Boltzmann epitomized thermodynamics as Carnot traveled to thermodynamics from the engine, then the symbol in industrial society. Boltzmann traveled to thermodynamics from the atom, the symbol of emerging scientific fundamentalism. And then he surprises me. He says thermodynamics still has both aspects. And these two aspects of thermodynamics are not compatible. So there's a mechanical version of thermodynamics and an engineering version of thermodynamics. And so he thought maybe they were complementary. My guess was that the engineering thermodynamics was more general. And of course, engineering thermodynamics, and my focus on that is one of the things that drew me to Bejan. So now what I've done here in this previous presentation and what I want to talk about today is, so a lot of people have looked at Bejan stuff and they don't get it, you know. A lot of engineers got it, and a number of people, they built on it, they've done wonderful things with it. But if you come to it from physics and math, it's not obvious what it is he's saying and what's the core. We want to go like, well, wait a minute, what's the core of this? And so I struggle to understand this, and I think Bejan has struggled to understand it too. And I love it that he shares with us his struggle and his different insights and clarifications along the way. So one of the things it comes to me, I thought this was a 1995 book, as I'm showing it here, but he was telling me the other day he actually published this, the first version of this, in 1982, I believe. So the impressive thing here for me is finite size systems and finite time processes. Okay, and this commitment to finiteness is, to me, extremely important. So, and Bejan comments at one point, he says, well, you know, this finite commitment to finite, this is really crucial. And he says, you know, he looks back and he says, if people had understood this, they could have done everything about the constructal insight, they could have done it 2 centuries ago. And he says, curious that they didn't. And I comment to him, I say, actually, they did. And I think that's what the people, particularly Carnot, is, you know, a couple of centuries back, he had hold of an early version, I would say, of the constructal insights. And so, and one of the things I realized following one of my colleagues, Antonio Drago, out of Naples and Pisa, and he has emphasized this difference between 2 different approaches to discussion of finite and infinitesimal. And the finiteness is really, I am reverse here, synthetic, and the infinitesimals always with the analytic. And he comments that, so the analytic uses completed infinities. Okay, so, and this is what you see in analytic calculus. You know, I can, you know, add up all these things, all these lines, and they give me the area. But in synthetic version, they insist that infinities are never complete. So an example of this is really, I think, if you look at the ancient problem of quadrature of the circle, and there's 2 versions of that. One is if I put a square, a polygon inside a circle, the square is the first approximation of the area of the circle. And then I say, oh, well, let's have it more sides, and I get the hexagon, and I go to a larger and larger number of sides. Well, if I go to the total number of, I say, oh, let's just continue that to infinity. And at that point, then the polygon approaches, and then if you take it to the completeness, it becomes equivalent to the area of this, to the circle, and that's okay. So, but however, so if that does that, then what you do in that analytic approach, you essentially say, I can express the properties of the circle in terms of lines. My old way of putting this is, but wait a minute, you're jumping the asymptote here. How do you know, there is no end to the infinity thing here. So an important point here is that what happens in the analytic tradition is it erases the essential difference between the opposites, between lines and curves, and between, if you like, translational motion and rotational motion. And in Bejan's program, it eliminates the 2 components. He always has 2 components to his in his system, which I'll mention more later. And you need to have these 2 components for optimization, and optimization is central to Bejan's deal. So one of the things that, so in the synthetic program captured by Archimedes, he both inscribes and circumscribes. He doesn't just inscribe in the circle, the polygons. He takes that and he goes like, yeah, but you don't go to the edge. You know, you can get as close as you like to the edge of the inside, and then he says, but then you go to the outside and you circumscribe, and you can get as close as you want, but you never reach it. Okay, and there's that old expression that the Greeks had a horror of infinitesimals, which they did. They didn't like infinitesimals. They didn't like infinitesimal reasoning. They liked finiteness. So what Archimedes is doing here is he's he's coming up with a different approach. I would just say it this way. He's asking a different question. What he wants is a ratio between the diameter and the circumference. Okay, what's the ratio between the diameter and the circumference? He's not asking about the area of the circle. Okay, so there's a lot more that can be said about this, which I won't go into. Anyway, so Bejan has this one statement he makes a couple of times that people seem to know a lot of this stuff, the scaling laws and hierarchy, but they don't understand them without the constructal insight. That's a bit of a diversion, I think. The other thing is, so think of Newton's thing here. So as we're taught Newtonian physics, the linear motion, the first law, well, it's a series of infinitesimal linear steps. I'm going infinitesimal. That's what Bejan doesn't like. So the theory of motion for that Newtonian physics is differential. Okay, so if it's differential, then something's being left out. Well, what's left out? That's curvilinear. So this in the differential version, you have a completely linear concept of motion, whereas in Archimedes and these guys, they would say, no, motion has to always have two components, has a linear component and a curvilinear component. And the other thing that gets left out in the Newtonian thing is time. Infinitesimals are static instants. Okay, it's a cut. Okay, if it's this Newtonian line, I take a cut here, a cut there, a cut there. And the analytic guys will say, add up all those cuts. Well, this goes back. This is an argument from Zeno's paradoxes. In Zeno's arrow paradox, he says, no, look, at each cut, the arrow is not moving. It's static. And so then you say, if you add up all those static things, what do you get? You don't get anything. You don't get any motion at all. So Zeno makes this argument against the use of infinitesimals. That goes way back. Interesting story linking that to Bejan. So another thing that happens here historically is coming from the Greeks forward. And all these guys, Leibniz, I'm going to talk about in particular, they all claim intellectual heritage to Archimedes. So they're saying what we're doing actually is what Archimedes was doing. Okay, we're doing this, looking for ratios and proportions. And so, and Leibniz makes this big move from statics to dynamics. And it's what I call, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, it's a meta shift. And this is one of the problems of going from science, where I grew up, to engineering, where Bejan is. And so a lot of us in physics, we like statics, we like symmetry and conservation of energy and stuff like that. You go to dynamics, you get some of that stuff, but what you're conserving is different than what's being conserved in that. The other thing I just mentioned here, that just in this paradigm shift, I call it a meta paradigm shift. Kuhn's shifts were within science. A meta shift is going from science to engineering, if you like, okay, and to dynamics, which I think, so dynamics is a term that Leibniz actually introduced, and I think that's the first clue to the history of thermodynamics, or one of the clues to the history of thermodynamics. He's trying to formulate a thermodynamics. The other thing about this shift is, I mentioned John Dewey and American Pragmatism, which I think was an early version of engineering thermodynamics. He makes a difference between a spectator and a participant representation of inquiry. In particular, Bejan goes on that this very much what he's developing is a participant view of reality and of inquiry. It's a bit of a diversion. Anyway, I think I'm just going to go in this. I think that I have to go past that. So the last thing I want to do here is a link to moving forward from Leibniz to Lazare-Carnot. And I spent a lot of time on Lazare-Carnot, and there's a lot of links that I've argued to Bejan between Carnot. This is where I say when you go back 200 years. Now, everybody knows Sadi Carnot, but I think the real genius in the family was Lazare, and particularly his fundamental principles of equilibrium and motion. And in that, he says there's a well-known principle of engineering practice. That principle is that there's a trade-off time velocity with strength or power. Okay, so for instance, I can use a pulley to raise a weight. I can use I could lift it myself. But if I use a pulley, then it's going to have a different path. Okay, the motion is going to have a path, and it's also going to take time. Okay, so this time and path. This is, if you like, a configuration and a time, which is central to Bejan and Laurenti's stuff early on. That I think that in engineering motion, there's always it's path dependent and time dependent, which is not the case in the mechanical version of thermodynamics, where we always hear about path independent and time independent change. Okay, so anyway, and Lazar goes on that basically physics, what he calls rational mechanics, can't make sense of this. And he also points out that there don't seem to be any engineers in rational mechanics. If you like my rejection of the scientific worldview, I say, where am I in that? Because there's no people in the rational in mathematical physics. Where's the people? And so rational mechanics, I say, is not self-referentially coherent. Can't account for itself. Let me roll on here. Okay, so it's the same thing, really. Well, the thing is, so one of the implications of what Lazar is saying is that engineers have options. They face choices. Okay, there's a trade-off here. So I can raise a weight one way. I can raise it another way. I can use a pulley with 2 components or 5 components, and every time I make a change, it's going to take a little more time to raise the thing. But it takes per unit power, it's less unit power to raise it. So engineers always have to make a choice. So the point is engineers, as they approach a problem or something, they always have to make these choices. And they have a sort of constrained free will. Okay, so they have the ability to do things in the world, but they don't have nothing determines them to do it one way or another. So that's the free will. It's constrained. Doesn't mean they can jump to the moon. It just means that in any action that they take, there's always a freedom, and that means that the path forward is as they face is indeterminate. It's not. So engineering action and the history of engineering, the evolution of engineering, is not deterministic. It evolves by some other process, which is what Bejan's all about. Okay, so I think well, so engineers make choices. That's the main thing, and they make choices for reasons. Okay, and I want to say these reasons are. If I make a choice for a reason, I want to imply that that's an intelligent choice. Although, as an engineer, I don't, when I face a problem as an engineer, I don't really know what the problem is when I start. Usually, I have to discover the solution. So, but I finally make the decision, to say, okay, this is the solution. It's a trial, and it's never perfect. I might miss. I might be approximate. I might have to try again. But I'm making intelligent choices, and it's an intelligent choice, and it's a discovery process that engineers are involved in. Okay. All right. So I think I'm going to stop there because I have some other stuff that I was going to go into, but I think it's secondary, and I've already gone quite a lot of time here. Can I do that? Can I stop sharing here for the moment? I will do that. So I have some other stuff to pick out to go after Bejan on, but I don't know. Was that sufficiently confusing, Adrian?
No, I thank you very much for presenting this for the second time.
Yeah.
Now
a ramble.
No, it's even better than in Turin.
Okay.
I think what you bring up is important precisely for opening people's eyes and asking questions about today's ideas and also the ideas that preceded today's situation. well, one could call it progress, what we're breathing today, but there's a lot of cacophony that goes on, and deep ignorance of the past. This is what
Adrian, you and I have talked about, is that there's a statement from Charles Sanders Peirce, and that is, it says, if you have anything really important to say, anything really fundamental, if it hasn't been said before, you're probably wrong.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's right.
One of the ways, one of the ways that I've tried going after understanding one is looking back, another is looking forward. I'm not going to go into that. I mean, there's some stuff about economics and so forth that I think where people are saying things that are very similar to you. But so for me, trying to understand what your insight was, that all this stuff comes together, and going, wow, look at how all this stuff fits together. And when you use constructual reasoning, I'm trying to get what is the core of that. So there are two ways that I've tried to clarify, at least for myself and hopefully to others. One is looking back. So I look back to Carnot, I look back to Leibniz. I've talked to you before. I think there's a lot of Leibniz. People that are trying to understand Leibniz would gain considerably by looking at your stuff, and I think also people trying to understand you would gain by looking at the connection to Leibniz. About Leibniz's engines all the way down. I mean, he's the first one that really gets into the idea of engines, and then I went back. All the people that, as I trace back historically, they all seem to claim intellectual ancestry to Archimedes, and it surprised me quite a bit. So that's why I went back and look at Archimedes, and then Archimedes, as I mentioned to you, actually go back further to Eudoxus, who was the first guy who came up with the theory of ratios and proportions. And I think constructal law, I'm increasingly coming to this, a constructal law is in many ways a theory of ratios and proportions. When you look at reality and you try to understand the structures and functions and processes of reality, I see continually you are finding this in terms of ratio, in terms of proportionalities in particular, and I think that's really, really fundamental to the constructal law.
Yes, and okay, and what you just said rhymes with the origin of science, which is geometry. And to make a drawing, you need to have those ratios. They're called aspect ratios or proportionalities. The drawing speaks because through those proportions, the page could be big or tiny, but the message is one if the shape of that triangle is, say, equilateral. At one point, I don't know whether this helps the rest of us present. You said something about what Bejan doesn't like. I got the question is, what does he like? Where I come from, geometry was very well presented. I was raised in Romania. Okay. Mathematics education in Romania, probably like in all the neighboring countries, is superior. So geometry, making drawings, going to art classes, even though you're a jock, it's important to know something about art and how to express yourself visually so that everybody understands you. Do not speak jargon. Speak common sense. These things are come from a society that, again, in my case, was not hoity-toity. It was not Western Europe that had the privilege of creating in peace. You know, Eastern Europe was to this day the barricade against the Mongols, protecting Western Europe from what happened in the East, or in the eastern part of Europe. Not to bring the Ottomans and everybody else, you know.
Let me ask you one thing though, because it's particularly important about this thing about drawing and aspect ratios and proportionality. I think you're right; it's absolutely fundamental. Now, one of the things that that coming from the physics math background, it bothers me. So there's this, Euler is, I call him now the evil genius, because he turned all this stuff back. He went back to infinitesimals. Okay, when finiteness came in, and he goes like, oh well, forget that. I can, circles. I can express circles in terms of lines. I don't need any of this, this stuff. So, but in Euler, he couldn't get it thing solved. But this guy, one of his students, this guy named Lagrange, comes along, and Lagrange comes up with this whole thing about how he's going to do mathematics and physics and everything. And one of the famous statements that gets repeated a lot in Lagrange's main big work called the Mécanique Analytique, he starts out, he says, and you'll see that there are no drawings in this at all. Going like, this should be a clue. And that's, really, because I'm going like, my God, this is exactly sane. Now, the problem is that line, Euler, Lagrange, into Hamilton, has dominated in mathematical physics, and they can't get out of it. And they can't get out of it because, this is where I hope you talked about a jolt in the other direction.
That's right.
Constructal law should be a jolt in the other direction. But how do we teach the scientists?
Yeah, I know the answer. To know how to get out is not to get in the first place. Okay, avoid. If you like drawings, keep making them. That was what I felt when I was a student at MIT. I got all my life there in science. I felt attracted to dynamics with drawings called mechanisms in motion. I was not attracted to invisible hand waving such as statistics, probabilities, all these things. Yes, I know math, I know calculus because of where I come from, but something else I meant to bring up, which should be very, very familiar to everybody here in the audience. I pay great respect to the meaning of the words, which is the origin of the words. I teach my students when I lecture, I ask them, do you know the meaning of the word that you speak in English? This is not even a lost art here. It's completely unknown and not practiced. They speak words that quite often are misused, and so I find myself teaching them a little bit of Greek, a lot of Latin, and to the point that I'm afraid I'll be fired here for being Eurocentric. But you cannot teach science unless one word has one sense. You see, the other day I remember you were saying something about maximum and minimum and hand waving. No, those are two very different things. They are complete opposites. You cannot confuse one with the other, and that's one reason to avoid the word optimization, because to opt is to make a choice. It's a lot more modest to say I opt than to say maximum or supremum, as opposed to minimum.
Well, opting is not. I'm big on the idea that engineering practice is not merely applied science. It's not like, oh, here's this problem, deduce the answer to me. No, that's not that way.
No. Engineering is a science. It is not the. Well, again, I go against my immediate environment here. Yes, the claim is that engineers put in the practice what the scientists teach them. It's the complete nonsense. Engineering is itself a science, and much of the so-called science, quote unquote, came from engineering. And by the way, all of it came from the military, okay, historically.
Yeah.
If you want to speak things they don't want to hear, talk about the military. And that's the wrong thing to say these days. But you mentioned the Carnots. Both of them were military men.
Yes.
And so many before them. All these people in antiquity, the engineering, the roads and everything, the Romans, come on, the fortresses, the ramparts, the city design. It was a structure for defense against obviously these pillagers that came from everywhere, especially the East. You get it? And so history is very important when you brag about science. Science doesn't grow on trees, you know. It comes from needs.
I want to bug you about one thing if I can. So I've talked to you about it before, and you sort of changed. You matured in this, I think. But I'm going to share my screen again if I can. That is going to work. Let me try that to see what happens. Oh my God! Let's see.
Hey, Gordana. I should have worn my MIT shirt. You, Harvard, I mean, I needed to neutralize you, okay?
Okay, so I still want to bug you about this, though, because one of the things that bothered me throughout all your reading stuff is the idea that is a constructal law physics. And you keep saying that it's physics. And the big question is, what's the relationship between science and engineering, or physics and engineering? And so one of the things, so Adrian, you use the word physics. I don't think you're wrong, because you go back, just like you're saying, the Latin of, you know, so what is physics? And I think, I can't remember exactly how you do it now, but physics is what, nature?
No, physics is Greek. The word is physis, which means everything that is.
Okay, so if you define it that way, we're good. The problem is when people come to read your stuff, and I think it's like I said, it's not that you're wrong because you use this Greek idea of physics, but other people, you say physics and they think mathematical physics. You know, they think that it's,
that's their problem.
Well, it is, but I know, but I'm trying to get them so they understand you properly.
You never get anybody to do anything. It's the old saying, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. Forget it.
But one of the things, I want to emphasize one of the things. So that you say, and other people that have dealt with some of these issues, Vincenti, I like. They say that you said the constructal law is a first principle, and what you mean by a first principle, if I can try to articulate that, is you can't derive it from mathematical physics, right? And you can't reduce it to mathematical physics.
No, forget about mathematical physics. You cannot derive it from another first principle. That's the definition. And there are extremely few of these because, again, I am talking the way I talk today because in thermodynamics, there are two of them, first and second laws, that are, each of them is a first principle. And dynamics was completely not interested in configurations, and even less in morphing configurations. But reality is conservation of energy, is irreversibility, which is second law, but also, and I would say primarily, configurations in incessant morphing and movement.
Yes. So anyway, what I want to say is that, and it's sort of the first principle, and a couple other people say something similar, and that this first principle, that means that all the reasoning that is based on the constructal law is autonomous. Okay, it means that all this reasoning that you're doing, it can't be reduced to or derived from, this analytic stuff. All right. So, and I want to say then that I want to say it's not physics. I think it's misleading to say that it's physics. In physics, in your term, in the Greek term, yes.
No.
People understand it, no.
Let me tell you the history. The constructal law is more than it's almost 30 years old, and at the time, on this campus here at Duke University, I was fully aware of the division here on campus, which was biology, or the life sciences, and the other sciences, which are not about life science, and the other sciences are the physical sciences, the geophysics, the physics, mathematics, all these things, and I kept making the point that all of them are physics, you see, because of the meaning of the word.
Right, but that's really a misunderstanding. So let me take on this is a little further. So you, our friend and your colleague in your department, which nobody knew of, and you gave a eulogy of him recently. I think it was very nice. But Petrosky says, for instance, he said, to understand, he says, everything you thought of as science is actually engineering. And because, so there are no engineers in the scientific worldview. So you can't get engineering knowledge at all, because there's nobody there to be inquiring, So you're saying is actually all knowledge comes from engineering, and it's always been engineering. And so science is some sort of abstraction from engineering. Engineering is the autonomous body of knowledge. So I want to say, so now I want to say this guy Vincenti does the same thing. So he says, real quick, he's what engineers know and how they know it. And he's saying that the same thing, that engineers they don't take their knowledge from science and apply it. Because, science is convenient, it's very nice, some rules of thumb and stuff like that. But, engineers know from experience that's not the way it works. Okay. So, and he goes, engineering knowledge is not derived from science, but an autonomous body of knowledge. This is what I would say about the constructal knowledge too. Constructal knowledge is an autonomous body of knowledge. And
but wait a moment, Tori, because we are entering into the territory of the common discussion. And I think this
well, let me just finish real quick. So yeah. I will end this. Anyway, he says that the world is made, engineering epistemology entails an engineering ontology. The engineering ontology is what Bejan gets into, which is the structure and structures of reality. Okay. And I would say one last thing. So here's this guy, Bugliarello, who talks about, he says, system engineers should be taught that engineering is a natural extension of biological evolution. Great. So where does that lead? So I think it said, this is where I think Bejan's view of reality leads to. Okay, so it's made up of structures that have functions, and those functions have purposes. I like the dog, because the dog did not take calculus, and he can still catch that frisbee. Interesting. So, and these are embodied intelligences. Okay, so and Bejan talks about this being intelligent. So when you create something, when an engineer creates something, he's actually embodying the intelligence in the process, and it's all anyway. So that's I will stop sharing, and Pedro. Anyway, I don't know if Adrian wants to comment on that or not.
May I tell you something, Adrian, and to you, Tori, is that you have let aside the real precedent, the terrific work of Darcy Thompson at the beginning of 20th century on growth and form, because he was applying the engineering, the physics, the skeleton, the motion, the evolution, and it was a terrific, I would say, precedent of putting into the study of life a whole body of basically engineering knowledge from fluid mechanics, from materials, etc.
Who are you talking about, Pedro?
Darcy Thompson.
Darcy Thompson, yes.
Darcy Thompson.
And I think Adrian talks about it. He said, I did all this before I ever knew of Adrian.
Yeah, you should add his name, because otherwise you will be guilty of philosophical mathematical scene.
No, I agree. I agree with you. He's there.
Yeah.
The,
Okay.
that work, by the way, here at Duke, in my early days, meaning my first 20 years, that were the time when I cooked up this constructal law, we had a very, very influential Department of Zoology. Knut Schmidt-Nielsen was one, and Stephen Vogel another one. These are big, big names. And they're the ones who introduced me to this Darcy Thompson book, and also to their work. The work on animal design or design in nature that existed was descriptive. It was not predictive. And I came in from the cold, really, with what I knew, which was thermodynamics first, and also the meaning of expressing yourself graphically. And I asked myself, why? Where is this shape coming from? Yeah, the shape of the river bifurcation. Very simple stuff. Why two? Why two and not three tributaries or branches? These are questions from when I was growing up in the Danube Delta. I actually grew up on the water and with the fish and everything. And I was surrounded by poverty, by the way, poverty. No vehicles, horses, carriages, this sort of thing. And in other words,
can I say something, Adrian, that on the Darcy Thompson thing, one thing you're saying, the difference between descriptive and prescriptive, which I think is extremely important. I think you're right. And one of your expressions, which I quite like about when you're talking about a form, you say it's not just spatial, it's temporal, which is to say that it's dynamic, it's moving, it's by its very nature, it's evolving, which you don't see that in Darcy Thompson. But, Darcy Thompson's nice, but it's descriptive.
Well, it's descriptive and it talks about, no? Well, fine.
I don't know.
Anyway, I have respect for the elders. When it comes to criticizing, I would much rather critique my contemporaries, okay? They're the ones who are marching blindly over the cliff, okay? And
Yes.
as I said a minute ago, it's their problem. But I
want to save them.
Wait, no. Hey, what? Who are you? The meat on the menu is this. Is the students? These young people.
Yes.
We have very good, brilliant students, and I tell them what I speak to them freely, just in this conversation, and I say things that I'm sure from the point of view of the prelates in place today, might seem like I'm taking a chance. I don't care, you see. I say the way it is, and I use the words deep ignorance. This is the problem, and the students who are by birth unbiased need to be exposed to the few of us who have seen the world from both sides. You see, I'm talking about not only geography but also from the difference between present and history, the past, and also yes, you didn't bring up the students should hear about the difference between freedom and lack of freedom. How about that?
Yes.
Most of the people who make noise today in science don't even question this kind
Can I
of.
ask something?
Yeah. Please go ahead, Eric.
Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between Charles Sanders Peirce's theory of potential and your theory?
About what?
Charles Sanders Peirce's theory of potential and your theory.
We speak a little bit slower. What's the first name you mentioned?
Peirce. Charles Sanders Peirce.
The pragmatist. pragmatism guy.
I'm not.
Yeah, he talked about potential and the openness of reality. That sounds a lot like what you're saying.
Can I respond to that first and just say, I've studied Peirce considerably. I don't think Adrian has had the opportunity to do that yet, but I think you're probably right. There's a close relationship. But Peirce was pummeled by multiple misinterpretations and so forth. So I try not even to mention him because there's so many different people who have their opinions, and I think.
Well, the theory of potential is really a little bit unknown about him.
Yes.
Yet that seems to be central to his work and his whole theory, and it seems to be very much related to our the other guy. Sorry, I don't know his name.
Well, I think you should. Yeah, you should write an article about the relationship between Peirce and Adrian Bejan.
No,
I'll let you do that. I'll let you do that.
By the way, speaking of that, the 15th Constructal Law Conference will be next November in Miami, and it's designed to be highly inclusive, meaning a very, very low registration fee and all sorts of features of freedom, meaning of invitation to access. And after this, I will share with Pedro the link to this conference. November, 3 days, meaning there will be plenty of time to present, and also I predict there will be a special issue in an impact journal based on the presentation. This is the group that has taken place.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
How do you relate your work to dynamic modal logic, where the possibilities change over time, and it's in part epistemological, but also you have agency in there. So you have multi-agent systems theory, which I helped develop, and distributed artificial intelligence, where you have agents cooperating, where your examples seem to say that cooperation, when you had your example of the dog and the human, right?
Yeah.
That they limit each other rather, whereas a lot of cooperation is not limiting. In fact, it's empowering society. Now, I see your expression of your face, but
no. You're confusing. You're confusing coercion with voluntary collaboration.
Okay. I'm not confusing the two. I'm just saying
you're talking about
the way you said it. That would be confusing the two.
No, yeah. Well, I didn't have time to give a talk completely about that. The leash is the symbol of lack of freedom. The urge to do better, yes, it makes individuals come together as a group, obviously, because it is because every decision that an individual makes is originally of a selfish origin, and so
not necessarily. I think that cooperative tendencies can be actually inherited and part of the very nature of the human being. So I don't think I don't agree with the selfish gene stuff. I don't agree that everybody's inherently selfish.
No,
indeed, there may be interests there, but not the way it's saying.
Selfish gene, you're referring to somebody's book. I never read it. I don't buy jargon. The point is that I joined a basketball team because it was very good in my youth. Okay, I
played basketball too.
Very good. Okay, excellent. We can have a beer or a glass of wine
But that's a good example. Let me just continue a little bit.
Yeah.
There you have two competing games, much like two armies competing with each other. On both sides, you have high cooperation, but actually they're fighting for something, and that in effect then leads to a kind of progress, in a way, evolutionary progress.
I'm not the phenomenon is called economies of scale. Yes, the group like the school of fish, okay, where the flock of birds
Mhm.
travels more economically when moving together. That is a constructal phenomenon
Mhm.
that I predicted by invoking this constructal law. On the other hand, for the same law, as I explained, I teach, I teach. I'll use my own slogan from about 2 books ago. I teach that marching columns do not climb peaks. Okay,
Mhm.
that's what. So there's a difference between group movement that's coerced, also known as communism, and another group movement which is called a free country.
Right,
You see,
right.
Okay, let me ask you, just to change a little bit the directions, about aesthetics, because you make a very interesting discussion on the golden mean as our artistic preference. But
Sure.
you obtain your calculation from the motion of the eyes, horizontal and vertical,
Yeah,
and that's very curious because you seem to obtain a ratio smaller than the golden mean. Not just 1.62, but 1.49 from this ratio. Let me, I will finish immediately. And I was reading recently from an architect specialized in Moorish artistry, and he was pointing that the style in many buildings of Moorish style, including Alhambra and other places, is not the golden mean, but lower. It is lower. And he was pointing 130 something, not just 160, 130 something as the most aesthetic preference. And I was strongly reminded of your work, and so I am curious.
no, but this okay, this person you quote and also your own presentation speaks of the phenomenon of diversity. When it comes to design, the better design attracts similar designs. You see, and that's why from antiquity again from there the preference of images that are scanned the fastest by the 2 eyes. This by the way goes back to the origin of not just the Homo sapiens, the origin of all the animals with vision. The reason why the eyes are aligned with the horizon is that the field of vision is horizontal, and that is the beginning and the end of the aha about this. And the fact that we like certain shapes, like the business card, where this iPhone here, like this, where everything is, we prefer to look at the paragraphs on the page that were figures on the page. The figures that are most pleasing to scan are the ones that look just like this screen of my computer. That is a preference that we salute without asking ourselves why. But I did ask myself why, and I came up with the discovery that yes, time is short. People, like animals, want to grasp the surroundings as fast as possible to get out of the way of danger. This is what's going on constantly in the animal realm. They're looking with 2 eyes in all directions except behind themselves. They have ears for that, which are also aligned with the horizontal. All these things speak of the importance of perceiving faster. And you're talking about these, who showed the worms? Somebody showed a picture with you probably did, some on the screen, just, that animals are these, things embodied with knowledge. Animals are actually embodied with organs that enable them to have guided locomotion. It's not just muscles and bones and spring action. It is the fact that they know ahead of time where they're going and where they will be. It's just like, and that is in fact the direction of evolution from the beginning. And it was greatly, let's say, accelerated by the occurrence of the organ of vision. Before the eye, there was no Cambrian explosion. All these species that move around today, almost everything we know is from let's say, the recent past of 565 million years ago. And all these things speak of nature, everything that kind of does what the engineer does, you know. It just comes up with ways of making the animal better. In our case, making the naked human be not naked anymore. I talk about us being the human and machine species, not the Homo sapiens.
Okay, Adrian, do you mind? Gordana has some question. Gordana, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, both of you. I'm impressed by your research, Adrian, and the span and the so many levels of organization that you cover with the same principle. And I have so many questions, I don't know which to ask. But one of those is, how you mentioned the role of an observer.
Yeah,
and it is becoming a very important question. Can you tell a little bit more? How do you involve the observer in your model?
I don't know. It just came. It came from I don't know where. I hear again when I try to publish in high places and I get rejected. I look at what they publish, and they publish stuff as if it came from a long expired civilization, meaning it's completely abstract. It's completely as if it was, as I said, discovered in the crypts, you know, when in fact the science that I remember is the one that was spoken to me by individuals. I had great professors at MIT who yes, they were very good teachers, but they were teaching in a way that was full of jokes, full of foreign languages, full of anecdotes, full of stories about who came up with this, just like Terry Bristol was talking about the history of these great people from 200 and 300 years ago. Those were my professors, and along the way, one of them quoted, what's his name? Come on, the Dutchman from Cambridge with the model of the atom. It will come to me. He was a soccer player.
Not Bohr, Heisenberg, whatever.
Yeah, Bohr, yeah. Bohr.
He was Danish.
It was
Danish, yeah, that's right, Danish. But he went to Cambridge. Anyway, so Bohr, he said physics is not what nature is. Physics is what we say about nature.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know. I mean, that is the truth, okay? And this is why the textbooks that we read and use are always changing. By the way, physics is not changing much anymore because it is a mature field. But there are other fields that are okay on their, let's say, viral portion of the S curve that are changing all the time, but that's actually the nature of the so-called field of knowledge or know-how that science really is. And anyway, so yes, the observer, the speaker, is a participant. The text of the book is morphing thanks to the few who come up with better ways to communicate. You mentioned just a second ago, the selfish gene. Well, that's one way to open people's minds. There are other ways, and the ones that are more effective are adopted, and they're adopted unwittingly by the next generation. You cannot force them to adopt, you know.
Okay, let me.
Mike, can I ask something? You didn't really answer Gordana's question, which is the role of the observer. Can you go back into that in your theory? How is the observer related to your theory? Can you answer that?
Yeah.
The observer is, first of all, the observer signs his name to his statements. The other thing, the observer, there are various kinds of observers. There are some of us who are humble, or artists of humility. There are others who are, I call them hoity-toity, or speak from their high position in administration somewhere, or the top of a journal, or in the National Academy somewhere. So there's a variety of let's call them prelates of science. One has to be aware of that, and but at the proverbial end of the day, which by the way does not exist, later the new generation takes what works and moves with it, you know.
Can I make a comment on the last two questions? I think so I've struggled with this. Where is the, the observer, if you like, in Adrian's thing? I think it comes in, it's there all the time. It was there from the beginning. It's like he says, after 20 years, what did I add to the constructal law? He said, I added the idea of freedom. And it's with freedom that he reflectively gets the idea that there's a choice going on, okay? So when there's a choice, you have to make a choice. So the engineer has to make a choice. So that's when we begin to see this, what I'd say, reflective sense of the participant in Adrian's stuff. I mean, it's always there because he's an engineer and he's doing things. He's always talking about that. And all the people who are applying the constructal law are all doing it as if they're engineers. But the engineer is, if you like, Eric, I think, is the observer. He's an actor. So he's not just like, if you like, in quantum theory, the collapse of the wave function. So he's an actor. He's doing things, and when he acts, he observes. Yeah.
Correct. And also, Eric used the word agency, didn't you? That means power source. That's the dictionary definition of that concept. And yes, a power is to be recognized, and along with it, before it, actually, the so-called flow architecture called engine has to be recognized, animal or not. All these things are essential in the nature that that empowers us, quite frankly.
Let me say one other thing. So I've said this, Adrian, that he hasn't gone into this directly, but for those of you in the physics and talking about what is the role of the observer and so forth, I think Adrian is constructal law is the key to understanding quantum theory. And in quantum theory, you have this. How does the there's Eric talked about potential. So how does the potential become actualized? Well, it needs an actor. Well, who's the actor? Who's the agent? It needs an agent who's acting. And I was saying to Adrian the other day, I said, over a period of time, you're going to realize that you've been doing quantum theory all along, because it's going from this, if you like, what this potential to actual, and it is something that it's not a deterministic process, and it's something, in order to understand it, you need to understand the engineer. You understand the engineer who has freedom making a choice. That's my 2 bits worth anyway.
Yeah, let me tell that we love to follow the schedule.
Can I say something to that?
But very short, Eric, please, very short.
What? Yeah, well, there's an interesting relationship between information and agency, where the information actually creates strategic possibilities for the agent. This is formal, it's not, it's mathematical. So that may coalesce in some sense with what you're doing, but in a more logical, formal manner. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bill, you are here and you have been working in relevant theories, cellular theories related to multicellularity, how the organism is built, even a cellular-based theory of consciousness. I would like to have, if possible, some dialogue on the constructal law. How do you see, for instance, the obligatory return to the unicellular, the constructal process?
I do not understand your last statement.
Yeah,
No,
sorry,
yeah.
it is a provocation to Bill.
To Bill.
Bill Miller.
To me. Thank you very much, Pedro. I appreciate that. This has been a terrific presentation. It's filled with exciting ideas. I've been familiar with constructal law. I've just begun really delving into it because it happens to marry so well with my alternative to neo-Darwinism, which is cognition-based evolution. And Adrian, you may not realize this, but there's an entire comprehensive, coherent theory that asserts that all life began as intelligence set life embodied in the cell. And the intelligent measuring cell is an engineer. The reasons that cells engineer together is because all biological information is ambiguous. There's never such thing as a pure environmental cue to any single cell. It's for very simple, obvious reasons that doesn't require a calculator to figure out. The cell lives in an environment in which any light source, for example, must travel through a medium. And there's a time delay before the plasma membrane of the cell can receive it. And then it can gather that some stimulus has occurred. It has to transmit the noisy environment of the plasma membrane, and then to be internally measured for info computation and valence. And this is as far as I and my colleagues are concerned, is the foundation of the engineering process that begins because of that. Because the information is imprecise, it must be measured. Because it must be measured, cells learn and they know that measuring together increases the validity of the information. Their degrees of freedom increase simply because they have a better grasp of the extent of the uncertainties that they are confronting, and from which they then make decisions and problem solve together as biofilms and together as multicellular eukaryotes. And so nothing is accidental. And I think the constructal law is it's an elegant underpinning of why all this fits together. Which leaves me with my question, which I was planning to ask. Thank you for the lead in, Pedro. Embodied intelligence was mentioned. I'm just curious to know, Adrian, how you see the connection between the animate realm, the biological realm, which I insist begins with the intelligent measuring cell, and the problem solving was another term that was used by Terry. Is there actual problem solving in the inanimate realm, or is that a rationalization of forces? Does problem solving begin with the instantiation of life, or not? In your view, I'd be very curious, because I'm actually going to work on a paper. I'm thinking about it, of how to underpin natural cellular engineering, which is part of cognition-based evolution, through the constructal law. And so I'd be very anxious to know your point of view here.
I plead the ignorance, or let's call it, if not ignorance, the fact that I feel the way I felt as an undergraduate in the new course, first lecture, and you speak, I don't know, but I resonate meaning I feel I resemble your kind of enthusiasm. You're talking about something that's adjacent or next door, and welcoming. and if you'd like to have this discussion develop into something more, let's say, with a greater shape to it, I'll be more than happy to play ping pong with you in this direction.
Well, can I try and?
Just a second. But the concept I mentioned that the human and machine species is my way of accounting for the fact that okay, in this case, living entities, meaning the bio, are smart. They're getting smarter, and they must have been doing this from much earlier, as you bring up with the single cell, and here I give credit to my father, who was a very talented veterinarian, and who I grew up around him when he was performing surgery on things, and he was constantly talking, using animal language to talk about everything, from the current government back then to the Danube River, and to the mud, and to the snow, and to all this thing. To him was one, and that's why I like friends that result from unexpected human events, you see, such as this one.
Can I try and answer Bill's question? One of the key things in Adrian's whole program, if you look at his thing, is the idea that the patterns that he sees in the constructal are both in the animate and in the inanimate. All right.
Yes.
So we didn't want to distinguish. It's important. You're asking. So I had this. I was joking with Adrian the other day.
But I avoid the word pattern because it comes from patron. It's not that. It's not template. It's design. It's a drawing. And drawings are similar, but they're not identical. But there must be a meaning. They are the effect coming from a cause, and we question the cause in everything we experience, especially negative stuff in life. Why did the roof collapse? That's asking, trying to find the cause. Okay, and so human nature is why this questioning happened, and why answers have also happened, which is why science has become a thick book, and on and on and on.
Okay. Let me
finish one last comment to Bill's thing, and that is, so Bill, I was joking with Adrian the other day, and I said, well, look, if it's the animate and the inanimate, they're the same. I said, so if there's a pile, somebody asked me, is that pile of rocks over there? Is it making choices? And I say, well, it has different paths to the future. So somehow, yes, the rocks are making choices, and just the inanimate. And what Adrian's saying is that inanimate, the patterns you see in the inanimate and the patterns you see in the animate are actually one thing. So you have to see, like, the animate and the inanimate, forget the difference between those two. It's all one, process.
Well, can I say something to that?
Yeah.
The negative way to interpret that is that he's an extreme physicalist, that everything is a physical process of interacting physical systems, which reduces basically back to physics. That's a real problem. I mean, I think
I know what he's
this
saying.
notion of consciousness has to come in as well, and also of strategic intentionality. That's not in his theory.
I think the pile of rocks is making the decision. Where did the pile of rocks come from? It has a history, and it has.
Sorry. This is
that goes too far.
And I was going to say before closing the session that Krasimir maybe is willing to make some point from his usually computational approaches. Krasimir.
Thank you I have a very little remark. I read some papers, and first of all, I want to thank you all for very interesting discussion. But now I have a little remark. To construct something, one needs to destruct or reconstruct anything else. So the constructal law is directly connected with the deconstructor law. I think we need to discuss this. Yes.
Okay, thank you for I'm already laughing. The word constructal was a joke, okay? And I'll tell you, by the way, it addresses your point. It is it's proceeding against the destructive direction that you bring up. When I had this idea and I was doing this kind of work, I did not have a name for it. And right here in this office, I have a PhD student from Brazil, Marcelo Herrera, and with him I was constantly joking. He would say something in Portuguese and I was laughing, and I would repeat the same thing in Romanian, which is nearly identical, and he would laugh, okay? So we had this joke going on, and then one day he shows up and says, Professor Bejan, there's a book with drawings similar to what you are designing for his own thesis, actually. And I said, what book is that? He said, well, is this book, The Fractal Geometry of Nature? And I was not aware. Thank God I was not aware. I said, bring me the book. This is in the early 90s. Actually, it was after 1995. So he brings the book, and I start flipping it, and I see in that book some drawings of tree-shaped things. And but on page 30 or 31, because I'm beginning to flip, Mandelbrot says that he chose the word fractal from the Latin verb frangere, which means to snap a stick into two pieces, which is identical to Romanian word for the same thing. And I said, this guy chose the wrong verb, because to fracture something has a time direction in it. You know, it has time to, okay, from 1 to 2, which is the opposite of what nature does. Nature puts things together, which is why you have design and configuration. So he should have chosen the verb construere, which is, and I said, damn it, the geometry of nature is constructal, not fractal. And we laughed our heads off. And at the time, wait, the joke actually developed legs. At the time, I had 2 manuscripts accepted for publication, and I was just proofreading the proofs. Back in those days, you know, they mailed you these pieces of paper. And I inserted this two-line constructal law. This time I gave it the name constructal, and it stuck. It stuck. And yes, to Casimir, the little story, which was full of laughs, spoke of the difference between constructing and destructing. So fractal, this means, by the way, the definition of a fractal object, according to Mandelbrot, is to keep fracturing and fracturing ad infinitum. Well, I have news for you. If you are an artist, you cannot draw a fractal object. And yes, the only reason there are drawings in this book of Mandelbrot is because he repeated that algorithm very few times. And well, by the way, he calls it the cutoff. With a constructal law, you predict the cutoff. You predict the number of bifurcations in the human lung. You predict the size of the alveolus. And you can do the same thing for the mouse and for the rabbit. if you know the constructal law, or if you know why the animal exists and for what purpose. It begins with the, by the way, we did not speak of the big word here, or elephant. The whole is what matters. The needed in science is holism. The attitude, again, is the opposite of reductionism. Why is this so-called little thing important? Why is it happening? Why? Because
So can you relate your work to Kant? Immanuel Kant. Related to Immanuel Kant.
No.
Yes.
You're provoking.
No, I'm not provoking. Immanuel Kant.
We are closing. We are closing. You can imagine. Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, okay, fine. Thank you, Casimir, for pushing the boxer in the other corner of the ring here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let me go now.
Thank you too.
Just before closing, now definitely I would like to take the challenge addressed by Bill Miller on cellular engineering. It deserves a discussion on its own. So Bill, you are invited to a new session. We don't know with whom, but we should have to work out that wonderful theme. And of course, Adrian, I think, will come to this session, the Academy. And we'll try to find the adequate speaker. Maybe you can make suggestions, Bill.
I'll work with you on it. I'd be privileged. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, Adrian and Tori, we have enjoyed, and we would continue quite a lot of time, but the schedule is the schedule. We are 20 minutes behind the schedule. I am a fanatic of the schedules. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro, for setting this up.
You too, and
Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Eric. Thank you, Gordana, and Bill.
Okay.
Yeah, we had some fun. It was good discussion.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.